Hey, welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction. More importantly, it's about recovery, and it's brought to you by our friends at Reprieve Recovery. It's an all-women's facility.
Facility.
Yeah.
But sometimes it feels like a shelter from the storms of the world.
I like what you did there.
Right?
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Because you're there, you're recovering, you're learning, you're growing.
And you know what? Their name is Reprieve.
And it is a reprieve.
And that kind of wants to lead me into where I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Is like treatment centers aren't the fix-all. And for many, it is just a reprieve from what's going on in their life and getting them into a safe space and a safe place to be able to kind of address what's going on and then build a plan and move forward. Mm-hmm. I think there's so many people when it comes to a treatment facility, they think that it's like you're going to the doctor and they're going to fix you. They're not.
Right. It's that medical model mentality of
yes.
like, I'm just going to show up and passively get fixed.
No, this is a safe place for you to find out what you need to work on. Where are you falling short in? How can we get a plan of attack moving forward and move you into recovery? But it used to be like, well, 30 days. Well, no, that's not how this works.
Yeah.
It's
collaborative, right? So if you show up to a place like Reprieve, and you are ready to do the work and you want to experience the expertise that they provide,
mm-hmm.
you can totally transform and change your life. But if you just show up and say, okay, you guys do the work, then that's not really how recovery works.
But there's a lot of people who used to go in, do 30 days, come back, and nothing changes, and so they resort going back to their old ways.
Well, I've known people that was even their intention, right? Like they're just like, oh, I'm just going to take a break, sober up, have a little break from using, and then I'll be clean and ready to go again.
There was quite a few people that I knew in my recovery center that got really good at rehabbing, and that's what they called it, where I'm just rehabbing. And so that I know if I go and do this, when I get back out, I got another 8 months before my parents are going to say, hey, I got to do this again, or something's got to change.
Yeah, it's for other people, or
Well, my name is Casey Scott. That's Dr. Matt Woolley. I'm an addict, and he's a therapist. And so today what we're going to do is ask an addict or ask a therapist. And I posed the question on all of our social and said, hey, if you've got a question you want to ask an addict or you want to ask a therapist, feel free to do so, and we'll try to answer those. And so we'll kind of tackle those and just kind of go that. So we don't have a guest today. But I also wanted to try something.
Well, we do. Who? It's all the listeners who have sent in their questions.
But I also wanted to call some people. Let's see.
You're just going to cold call some people?
Yeah.
Nice. I think I remember morning shows that used to do that. Yeah.
Let's see. Here we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask them their advice when talking to addicts.
Okay.
Can you hear that?
It's exciting.
Yeah. One ringy dingy. What if it does?
Well,
if not, I got more numbers.
You got a lot of numbers.
And we can also edit out stuff.
That's true.
You know what? I've got a number. This guy will pick up right now. And what we're going to do is, because these are guys that I go to get guests.
So that was one of our...
That was Johnny Red.
Johnny Red. He's been on the show. And he is at...
Reprieve,
yeah.
Yep. Hopefully this guy won't swear.
He might.
Yeah. He'll mention golf for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a bad time to do this.
I know. What's everybody up to?
I thought that for sure they'd pick up.
Yeah.
You've reached Christian Smith, you son of a gun.
Oh, hey, you're live on the podcast. I said he's either going to swear or he's going to talk about golf. How are you doing, Christian?
I'm doing well. What are you doing?
Hey, so how are things at Wasatch Recovery?
They're really well.
What today we're doing is we're answering questions from our listeners. And before I got to the questions, I wanted to talk to some of my favorites. So, Christian, what would you say to somebody who's contemplating getting help right now?
Do it. And here's why. This addiction of any kind, including alcoholism, doesn't go away on its own and almost always gets worse progressively, because alcohol and drugs aren't the problem. They're just a symptom of underlying unresolved emotional pain, trauma, feelings of abandonment, mental health issues. That's what's fueling this. And treatment will allow people to get on top of that, work through it, and receive tools to cope with future events that invoke similar emotions.
All right, Christian, I got another follow-up question for you. And when I did what you do for a living, people would call me and say, hey, fix my son, fix my daughter, fix my husband, fix, and, whoever the addict in their life is. How does that work?
Well, my blank thought is that we don't fix anybody. We offer counseling for the ability to rid people of that pain that I just talked about, and then we ask them to do the work. We don't fix anybody.
Because we were talking about the old school of way of people just going to a treatment center that was going to be the start and the end, and when they walked out their doors, they were fixed.
Yeah, no, that's not. That has been my experience. And on top of that, add how many times what you just said. I can't count over 15 years how many times that family member has said, "Fix Johnny," and then Johnny does good work. He uncovers the causes, works through those experiences, and has now received tools to cope with future events like it. Goes home, and mom and dad or wife or siblings or support people haven't done anything with their own stuff. And then we see Johnny calling us another 3 months down the road, and families going, what happened? So my answer to that question is, this thing it affects all of the family or the support system. And if everybody involved isn't willing to get some sort of help, then we're, it's a tough road to hoe. The four C's of Al-Anon I love. Family, you didn't cause this. Family, you can't cure it. Family, you can't even control it, although you've tried. But the fourth C, family and support people, at some level, and most of the time you didn't even know it, you contributed to it. So figure out what roles you are playing and make the corrections. Boundaries.
I'm glad those were the four C's.
Yeah.
I was a little worried for a minute.
Especially with your dirty mouth.
I want to swear so bad right now.
Yeah, please don't. This is a KSL podcast. We appreciate you picking up the phone, Christian. You have a wonderful day. Love you. Bye.
Wise words, though, right there. I love Christian.
Yeah, and this is a guy who's been through it. And if you don't remember Christian's story, you can go back through our archives and listen to his.
Christian and his daughter have been on the show.
Yeah, and he's been on it multiple times, and Christian really knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people want sometimes. Like when I was looking for help, I didn't really understand or want help from somebody who I knew wasn't suffering from the same thing as me.
I think that's an interesting point that you bring up, because I'm a psychologist and I do therapy with a lot of people. Anxiety disorders are my specialty. Of course, substance abuse is part of everyone's life, so we see that in the office quite a bit. Depression. Do I have to be anxious to treat anxiety? Do I have to be depressed to treat depression? No, and probably it's better if I'm not, right? Or recovering from those things even. But substance use and abuse is a little different. I do think do you have to be a recovering addict to treat addicts? No, you don't. But I think that it's more relatable when in a treatment facility, the counselors, the staff, those folks are people in recovery too, because it is such an uphill climb. It feels like such a battle. Most people go in there almost not believing that they could ever be sober. And to sit there with these other folks like Christian, who've been there, been through it, and now are these examples of a beautiful life in recovery. I think that's really helpful.
Well, I can tell you why some of that is, because I'm an addict myself, is because how many times have we had people sit in that chair right over there and talk about how I'm not like everybody else. My disease is unique. Nobody has it like I do. And so how would you know what I'm feeling if you have no idea what I've been through?
Never been there. Yeah.
And so that's what it is. And then all of a sudden, that's the first time that you don't feel alone. And when you're in a process group or you're in an AA room and you're surrounded by people who are going through similar things that you are, and you go, oh, wow. Or you get up there and you hear somebody's story and they say something that really touches home to you because you're suffering something similar to that. And you're like,
right.
Oh, I'm not alone. Because there were so many things that I carried around for so many years that I was afraid to say out loud because I thought it made me a bad person, or why am I the only person like this?
Or fear of being judged. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so when somebody comes, it was like, I'll use my ex-wife as an example. She would just say, why can't you just stop?
Yeah, which is a common thing for people to say.
And I don't blame her, but I don't think she understands the gravity of this disease or the grip that it held
There's
so tightly.
so many people out there that still think you can just stop. You're just not trying hard enough.
It's a choice.
Yeah, it's a choice.
Yeah, and I wanted her to go, listen, I've tried every other way. I've tried ways that you haven't even thought of, and it's not working. And so it's not as simple as that. So for me to try to relate to somebody who has no idea of what I'm going through, then why would your advice be any good to me? Now, I'm here to tell you, being sober now for over 6 years, you can learn from somebody who is not an addict. They do have good information for you.
Oh, for sure. Expertise, training, all of that is very useful. And so having some of those people be involved in your recovery is important. But I think the beginning of recovery, at least, starts with that connection with people that know what you're going through.
The commonality.
Yeah. And one of the things I love that Christian said on there, he nailed so many important points right there. One of the things that he said is a segue from this, and that is it's a family disease. And if you don't educate and train family and support people in the addict's life, then they just go right back to the environment that may be part of the influence in their use.
When I was in recovery, there were so many times where people would be doing good, doing wonderful, and then have to go back to the same toxic living situations that they were in before that led them down that road.
Right.
And so they say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome.
Right.
So what did you think was going to happen? That you escaped this life and you want something better, but your only way is to go back into that life.
Well, and this conversation started back in the 1960s and 70s when the term is recidivism rates from hospitalizations. People who are hospitalized for mental health reasons and they're there for a while and they get great treatment and a place to rest and therapy and all of those things. And then they just put them on a bus and send them home. And that place may be chaotic and unsupportive, and pretty soon their mental health declines and then they're right back into the hospital. And so in the 1960s and 70s, they started talking about, like, we can't do that anymore. Like, that's not good care. We've got to be able to have step downs, and that's where intensive outpatient IOPs come in.
Sober living. And if possible, family-based therapies, if they'll come in and if they'll learn how to support the person with a mental health issue. And believe me, substance use and abuse and addiction, those are mental health issues. And that's the other thing he said, is that there's, your addiction to alcohol or whatever it may be is a symptom covering up underlying unresolved issues. And the mental health and financial stresses and marital stresses and all these other things. I'll bring up 2 points and to talk about how the family disease affects everybody, and that being addiction. I remember sitting in there and it was family time, and my mom and my older brother came, and the therapist got up there and talked about what we were doing in the house and how the family could help at home. And therapist, his name was Eddie, he goes, and by the way, you guys back at home, it would really benefit you guys if you saw a therapist and got together as a family and learned some tools. And my brother nudged me going, yeah, I don't need a therapist. And my therapist saw him do that and he was like, yeah, even you. But he didn't think he had a problem because he wasn't the addict.
Right. You're the problem.
I'm the problem.
Right.
And if you fix me, then everything's better. But what Christian also said is that fourth C, whether you know it or not, you likely contributed it.
There you go.
And whether it's, whatever it may be, you have contributed in some way. And so...
Well, the word dynamic is the result of interactions between two or more people or things, right? There's a dynamic. And you know how it is when you meet somebody and you walk away feeling kind of like down. Mm-hmm. That's the dynamic between you and that person. Or when you walk away feeling energized,
bouncing.
You feel like great. That's the dynamic. So we live in a dynamic world between you and objects, between you and people, and especially between you and the people you spend the most time with, family, people at work, your friends. What are those dynamics like? If you're listening right now, that would be a great question to ask yourself. How do I feel when I walk away from a family event, when I leave work, when I just got done hanging out with my pals? How do I feel? What's that dynamic like? Is it positive? Is it optimistic? Does it make me want to be my better self? Or do I struggle? Is it stressful? Is it a downer? And think about how those feelings every single day, if you're around those people, might contribute to your healthy habits or your unhealthy habits.
Well, Bill Child's a billionaire. He says, you want me to show you your future? Show me your friends.
Yeah.
You know, and I think back to that all the time. And I just got done with another meeting in Lehigh with my other job, and we were talking about how your vibe attracts your tribe. And so you want to hang with like-minded people. You know, and there were so many times that
And again, we know that's true because it rhymes.
Yeah.
Right?
Alliteration's fun.
Uh-huh.
But here's the thing, even in the 12-step rooms, you'll go there, and one of the first things people will say when they go in the room and they hear somebody up there speaking who's got any amount of time underneath their belt, they go, I want what he has.
Yeah.
How do I get what he has?
Right.
Well, the best way is to hang with him.
Hang with him. Right?
Figure out what he's doing.
That's the beauty of sponsorship. That's one of the things about 12-step
And the fellowship.
I really like is the sponsorship.
To bring it all back to a point, I remember this time, and it hit me so beautifully when we had Lizzie Dankers here. She's in charge of Action Recovery up in South Ogden.
Right.
And her husband, he was here with her as well. And the therapist said to both of them, they said, here's what's going to happen. She is going to learn, and she's either going to learn and grow away from you, or you're going to learn and grow with her. And he was thinking to himself, well, I'm not an addict.
I'm not the problem.
What am I going to learn? Yeah. But he loved her so much and wanted it to work so much that he said, okay. And so he did the classes with her. He did all the stuff with her because he didn't want to lose her, because the therapist was right. She is going to grow and move in a different direction. And either that direction is going to be with him or away from him.
Weirdly, with couples, the person who gets left behind starts to resent the progress of the other person, whether they realize it or not. They kind of look at that and they go like, well, they're changing. They're different. They're not the person they used to be. I'm glad they're not, using anymore, but we don't have as much in common. And that's a result of one person growing and the other person not.
It's so fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. Those dynamics are crazy.
Well, Christian brought up the 4 C's, so I've done a little work here.
Okay.
And I found some stuff,
I was
too.
a little worried about what he was going to say.
Yeah, me too. I've got the 4 C's of addiction right here.
Yeah.
And the 4 C's of addiction, the first one is compulsion. Compulsion is characterized by a irresistible urge to engage in particular behavior.
Right.
Now, when we're talking about these 4 C's, I want you to kind of relate them to your life in any way you think makes sense.
How many times have we had somebody on the show? They may not have said compulsion, but they said, I think Casey from last week, he even said, he's like, I was always thinking about, during the day, when am I going to get to drink next?
And I used to pick restaurants by which bar they had and if they had a bar.
If they had a bar, right?
My ex-wife.
You didn't want to go to a place that didn't serve.
Well, she would go like, hey, do you want to go to dinner? And I was like, yeah. She was, well, let's go here. I go, do they have a bar? Not what kind of food is it?
Yeah.
Do they have a bar?
Yeah.
And that was the compulsion. And a lot of this stuff, and whether it's soda pop, pornography, betting, whatever it may be, keep this in mind as we go over these.
Okay.
The second C, craving. Craving refers to the intense desire to use a substance or engage in a specific behavior.
Yeah.
And the craving is the itch. It was the itch for me.
You can taste it.
Yeah, you know what I mean? I could hear somebody popping a beer, or I knew 5 o'clock was coming, or I knew the concert was there. The craving, it was like I
Cravings are very physical, too, right? So a compulsion is going to push a physical behavior, but the craving, you can feel it in your body.
And the best way to describe it is an itch, and it's something that you want to scratch.
Yep.
And that itch is not going to be scratched until you get what you're looking for.
Right.
The third C is consequences. Addiction is marked by a pattern of continued use or engagement in addictive behavior despite the negative consequences.
What would you say to somebody who said, well, it's just my life, it's not hurting anyone else, so the consequences are just mine. What do you care?
But there are consequences, whether it's...
But they're my consequences. Why do you care what my consequences are? What would you say to them?
I would say, are you living your best life? I'd feel like, are you coming up short? You might be able to sell in yourself that bill of goods, but it's not really what it is.
I would say that. I would add to that, you don't live in a vacuum. Your consequences affect other people. You are somebody's brother, sister, husband, boss, employee. Like you don't, there is no way. Like your consequences, Casey Scott, affected a lot of other people.
100%.
The consequences of my behavior affect a lot of other people.
Thinking about it back now, and this is just fresh off my head, some of the consequences of my actions affected people I didn't even know.
Oh, for sure.
People that I worked with that worked in different departments that had, their paycheck depended on what I did.
Your show brought in a lot of revenue.
And so by me getting let go, getting fired, and not
That
let go,
affected other people.
people that I didn't even know.
Yeah,
and
for
it
sure.
breaks my heart. The fourth C is control, or the lack of, is defining characteristic of addiction. As addiction progresses, individuals often lose control over their ability to regulate their substance use or addictive behaviors.
Control is interesting because you can look at it from different points of view. One is losing control, and obviously that seems, obvious when you're intoxicated or, you're losing jobs and your life is out of control. But you also shift what you're trying to control. So you stop trying to control the important things in life or the healthy things in life. And just for a second, control gets a bad rap out there. Mm-hmm. But we have to be in healthy control of our lives, right? Otherwise it's miserable.
Yeah.
But you start to control other things, like the restaurants I go to have to have a bar. That's a type of control. I'm trying to control my environment in order to keep using my substance.
I can't control the amount I drink, so I control the people I hang with.
There you go.
Does that make sense?
That's perfect, because then you don't have to, because those people don't either.
Yeah.
Right.
And so you start to limit where you can go. You can start to limit what you do.
Who you're with.
And so you say, well, I've got no. You don't. You're now changing everything in your life because you can't control this.
Right.
So you don't have control.
Yeah.
You have the lack of.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I think that's pretty interesting, the 4 C's.
I love it.
Okay, so now I did some more research, and I said, are you addicted? And I just typed it into Google.
Okay.
Because I wanted to know, because there were certain times that, I went to college and I went to health class in high school and all that stuff, and there was these set guidelines. And I always...
Sure, checklists almost.
And I always thought they were BS.
Well, we have them in mental health, like, are you anxious? Are you depressed?
Are you drinking more than 2 drinks in one sitting? And I was like, yeah, everybody does.
Yeah.
They
don't, but yeah.
And they're like, are you binging on the weekends? I go, yeah, I'm in college.
And Wednesday.
Yeah, and Wednesday. And then Taco Tuesday.
Yeah.
And then whenever Cinco de Mayo lands.
Thursday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you start to rationalize that and justify all that. And so there's certain things that... had I really paid attention, I would have known a long time ago that I was an alcoholic and an addict.
Sure.
But you don't, because you only know what you know. Right. And so it's not until hindsight that I go, yeah, there was red flags all around.
So when you were in your addiction, did you ever Google or look up like, I wonder if I'm an addict? Did you ever do that?
Lots.
Yeah.
So much that I also manipulated sometimes that I would leave the laptop open after a big fight with my wife.
So maybe she'd see it.
And go, hey, he's working on it. But that was just me manipulating the system in a sense.
Yeah.
But I was really curious. I would look at it and I would go, there were so many times that I wanted to go into a 12-step room or I wanted to talk to somebody, but I was just so afraid to. I didn't know how to start the conversation, and I didn't know
what you needed?
What?
A reprieve.
I did.
There you go.
But I didn't know who to talk to because I didn't want to talk to my buddies.
Well,
because I didn't want to seem like I was.
It's hard to admit that you have a problem, and sometimes you don't really know. So let's find out.
So the first question is, has your alcohol or drug use negatively affected one or more of your relationships?
Ding.
Weekly, daily. It happened all the time.
Right.
But I never thought to myself, this is a me problem. It was, they don't understand, or they don't get me, or they're too tight, or they're too righteous, or they're just out of the loop.
They're judgy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's what it is.
They don't know what I'm going through.
If you find yourself in a strained relationship or with no relationship at all, with family and friends who don't approve of your actions or who don't share your habits, you may have an addiction. So that first one is pretty simple.
Yeah.
And so I think you go down this list and you go, okay, I'm kind of, but not really, because they're not aligned with my beliefs. So then the second question is, has your work or school performance ever suffered due to drinking or drug use? Ding.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I've lost jobs.
Right.
I have showed up hungover to work and not given my best performance. I have missed tasks because I was hungover, tired, or whatever it may be. And so, those are two.
Pretty clearly obvious. Yeah.
Number 3, this is one where I think some people would be like, okay, have you ever stolen alcohol or drugs or money to pay for them?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Yeah.
Because that's one of those things that now is affecting who you are as a person. You are now doing things that you never thought you would do.
Yeah. So I was talking with our psychiatry residents yesterday and giving them an overview of this lecture we're going to do, and it takes 2 years to do it. We do it every month for 2 years. And one of the things is moral development.
Moral.
And I've had people push back on that and say, oh, why are we learning about that? And it's like, well, and now if anybody asks me that, these residents, I always say, when you go to get your coffee and the person gets it wrong, do you feel comfortable screaming at them in their face because they got it wrong? These people are psychiatrists, so they're like, oh my gosh, no, I would never do that. And it's like, you have morality. That's your morality. Some people are okay with that. You're not okay with that. We all have moral development, and that becomes a core of your identity. So when you violate your own moral development, when you start stealing, now you start to feel terrible about yourself, and that becomes one of the underlying reasons to keep using.
And when you think about it, how many people started at such a young age of doing these things? And many people got their first alcohol by stealing.
Stealing it from the 7-Eleven or whatever.
Stealing it from 7-Eleven, stealing it from the
neighbor's house.
Or wherever it may be.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, that becomes easier and easier because you get a little further into your addiction and you're like, well, yeah, I mean, it's a harmless crime.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not, but that's what you will sell yourself.
Yeah, you justify it.
Here we go to the next one. Have you ever overdosed, needed medical attention for misuse of a substance, or had a health scare because of it? And so when people say, I blacked out, sometimes people will say that in a goofy way. Like, I got so drunk, I blacked out. And other people almost kind of laugh at it. And Cheer was like, yeah, you got really hammered.
Yeah.
That's not good. If you cannot remember what you did, that is a scary situation.
Yeah.
And I blacked out before.
Sure.
And it's not good. But I never thought it was as bad as it is now.
Well, you probably never considered it a health scare, but it really is.
Right?
Yeah.
You are uncontrol of your body. I mean, last week's guest, Casey, says he shot a gun in his trailer.
Yeah.
And it doesn't...
Most of the criminal behaviors that addicts perform, or many, I should say, are when a person is technically blacked out. They don't recall it. Yeah.
This next one is one that is when I started to sense that I had a really problem. Now, I checked the boxes on all of these before, but this one right here is that really got me. Do you use drugs or alcohol when alone or when you first wake up in the morning? The drinking alone was a sad existence.
Yeah.
It was sad. How many times I sat on my back deck with a 12-pack and would make calls because I didn't want anybody to see me, but I didn't want them to think that I was hiding.
So you wanted to connect with people, but really you were just hiding in the backyard drinking on your own.
But I didn't want to connect with them in person because then they would know I was drinking, and it was 10 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was probably my 6th beer. And then I'm ashamed of it, but there was times that I would wake up in the morning and I would have to have a shot of something or something just to calm my nerves, just to get me through the morning to where I could then let the gloves off and go back on my deck and sit by myself.
Our news anchor guest, I'm blanking on his name.
Randall
Carlisle. Remember, he talked about how he had to drink just to shave.
3 beers.
Yeah, in the morning so that his hand would calm down and he could get, smooth enough to shave without nicking himself.
And so now you're drinking in the morning to shave.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean.
So morning drinking and drinking alone are really clear signs that you have a problem.
And the 6th one is, do you think about drugs or alcohol in between using them?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's...
And I think that's a societal problem. Really, it is.
Well, we get, commercials, social media.
Jimmy Buffett says it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah.
Which is rationalization and justification for drinking at any time.
Any time, right. And that's, and of course, the clever marketing is associating alcohol with having a good time, with relaxing, so you're always thinking about, and even the fact that we say 5 o'clock is when you can start drinking. Well, what happens at 5 o'clock typically in the Western world is that's when people get off work.
Yeah.
And so that's just an association with relaxing and having a good time. And so we've been fed that commercial line our whole lives.
priming the pump all day long through advertisement, for commercials, from movies to whatever, is that you need this to have a good life.
Right.
You're not going to enjoy the end of your day unless this is in your hand, unless you're doing this. Now, I'm specifying alcohol because that's the prevalent one. Yeah. But I mean, now with marijuana, with gummies, with sodas, with everything out there, I mean, that's all they're doing.
I think Budweiser ought to do a commercial with just a sad guy on his deck in his backyard drinking by himself.
Because that's me.
I mean, that's more the reality.
100%.
It's not always a good time.
So those were just some questions and things that I wanted to go through. And then, use those 6 questions, use the 4 C's, and kind of put it up against your life, whether it's fast food, whether it's soda, whether it's pornography, whether it's gambling, whether it's video gaming, or whatever it is.
I will say one of the hardest exercises that I do with people in a therapy session, one of the most emotionally difficult, I should say, is when we do a personal inventory.
And that's part of the 12 steps. And that's something that we did in rehab as well. And that's
tough though. And I'll tell you right now, even if you're listening to this show and you don't consider yourself a person with an addiction, which is fine, not everyone has one, but do a personal inventory anyway along all of those sorts of things. Maybe substitute alcohol with, Netflix or scrolling on your phone or, whatever it is, shopping, eating, do a personal inventory and how am I really doing? To be honest, everybody should be doing their own personal inventories from time to time, because we all slip into unhealthy behaviors and habits.
And we're not doing this so you go back and go, oh, wow, but maybe it'll give you a little empathy. It'll give you an understanding from somebody who's, battling substance abuse or drugs and alcohol, whatever it may be. You might have a better understanding because you're like, well, I don't have a problem. Okay.
Yeah.
You might not have a problem to that degree, but
one that I think people can relate to is scrolling on their phone. And people scroll on their phone alone. They'll scroll on their phone first thing in the morning, last thing at night. They'll miss out on things like social opportunities and even things at work because they're on their phone. Mm-hmm. So, that may not be heroin, but it should help you kind of realize and have some empathy for others that maybe I've gotten into this unhealthy habit and I crave it. I look forward to it.
Are you getting endorphins when you're scrolling and you see something funny and then you want to share it and you're looking for the gold? I mean, that's...
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. I found myself in a parking lot of a gym for 20 minutes going, what am I doing here?
Looking at my dumb phone. Right?
Yeah, you know what I mean? Yep. And I've made deals with myself. One more funny one and I'm done.
But that one wasn't funny enough. I need one more funnier one.
I've said that.
Yeah.
Hey, so I opened it up to social media.
Yeah.
I said, do you have a question for an addict or a therapist? And I said, feel free to drop them down here. Some people reached out. Some people just hearted it because maybe they don't want to ask their question in an open forum like that. But some people sent me one. And this one said, would you consider eating disorders and or self-harm addictions?
Is that for me?
Yeah.
Not technically, but there are addictive qualities to it, like compulsions and
craving.
And craving in a way, craving the relief or the release or the immediate response that comes from that. So we wouldn't technically put it under the category of addictions, but there are definitely strong addictive qualities to those behaviors. And the reason is they provide a very strong emotional and physiological relief and release for the person who's suffering. So if you've never thought of hurting yourself when you're emotionally distressed, then the thought of that might seem like, oh, why would anybody do that? But yeah, that's another one of those where you just have to understand that person is struggling with something that you don't understand. Eating disorders are the same, bulimia or
anorexia.
Restricting your food, anorexic behaviors provide a physiological response right away, as well as an emotional response. So I understand why somebody would ask that. And if the person out there wants to think of it that way, I understand that.
And I would do a call back to what Christian said earlier in the podcast. Those are symptoms to underlying problems.
Right. And I will say this. I think we talked recently about like how all therapists don't do the same thing. So those two issues, self-harm and eating disorders, really require a specialist.
And there's a great one in Utah County. It's called the Center for Change.
Great. They do.
We've
great
had
job.
them on the podcast. I've toured their facility, and they do wonderful things there. And so I guess to this person who asked that question, I always say first when anybody asks me a question like that, I go, the fact that you're asking that question leads me to tell me that there's probably something going on here that probably needs to be discussed or explored a little bit further.
I would say on a fairly regular basis, maybe once a month, I will get somebody who wants, give me a referral, and in discussing what they want to come in for or their loved one needs, we'll discover this is a primary eating disorder issue. And I have over 20 years experience being a psychologist, but I am not a specialist in that. And so I'm glad to help them find a specialist, because that's how we need to think about care, is like, who's the specialist for this issue?
The next question is, can you be an addict to the thrill of a person?
To the thrill of a person?
Yeah.
Like the thrill of being around or with someone?
Or,
addicted to their personality?
Well, how many times have we had people on this podcast who said, I'm addicted to the bad boy. I like the bad boy. Yeah. Or I like this person. And it sounds weird, but people.
Yeah, I crave being around Casey Scott.
Ooh.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think we're using the term addiction. There's like colloquially using it that way, or like technically. I guess you'd have to go through all the technical, like, do you have withdrawal symptoms when you're not around the person? Do you crave being around them?
Can you control yourself?
I would say that there are compulsions for being with certain people. And when we're talking about personality disorders, there's a personality disorder called the dependent personality. And that person will become dependent on the feedback from other people in order to feel good about themselves. So dependents often marry narcissists, because narcissists thrive. They only thrive when they're being adored, and dependents only thrive when they're adoring. And so it's sort of like, I call it the match made in hell instead of the match made in heaven. So in that way, maybe there's some addictive stuff there. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so here's a question that just popped into my head. Can you be addicted to being a codependent, if that makes sense? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people that are codependent.
Sure.
Who it
I guess that's what we're talking about. Huh?
Yeah, it checks a lot of boxes of being an addiction. You know what I mean?
Well, I think codependency
Yeah.
is a sufficient term for what we were talking about there. And if we call it an addiction, maybe we're just sort of complicating the issue.
Okay, so then let's break down codependency.
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, I kind of described it there with the dependent personality. Codependency would be like a person feels emotionally dependent on.
Let's put it in addictive and recovery terms. Who would be a codependent for an addict? A mother, a brother, a wife, a husband?
Like who would they be codependent on?
So they're codependent on the addict themselves, right? You know what I mean? They're like, they feel purpose because they want to help this person, but they're not really helping this person. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think it has to do with, I use the term feedback. Like, what do you get out of being with that person? So I've known a lot of codependent people who are willing to put up with a lot of unhealthy and abusive behavior from someone because they feel so emotionally dependent on that person giving them some level of approval, even if you and I'd look at that and say, boy, that's really not worth it, what you're going through there. So, I think, the classic, maybe a mother of an adult son, and the son is an addict and using in their house and taking advantage of them. But, the mom is kind of dependent on, just one more time, I can help them, they're my little baby. There's some codependency there, but they're.
So I had an interaction yesterday with a friend of mine. He goes, hey, do you mind if I bend your ear for a little bit? And I was like, you bet. What's the problem? What can I do? And he said, my son, he's in a bad way, and I don't know what to do. And he's spinning out of control. He's gotten in trouble with the law. And we've been down this road before, but it was 6 years ago, and I'm at a loss. I go, how can I help? He goes, I don't know what to do. And I go, what have you been doing? And he kind of tells me what he's doing. And I go, how's that working? And he goes, nothing's getting better. I go, this is going to be tough because I don't know if I could do it myself. It was my kid we're talking about.
Yeah.
I said, but you got to stop. You got to cut him off.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, but how do you do that? And I go, I don't have that answer, man. I don't. I just know what you're doing now is not helping.
Yeah.
And what you're doing is watching this young man slowly kill himself. And that's not fair to you.
Mm-hmm.
That's not fair to him. So I don't know what to tell you. I said, I've got resources. I can help you. I can point you in the right direction.
But that was a good therapist response. Like, what are you doing? And then let's evaluate how's that working. And he came up with the answer himself, didn't he? Yeah.
And then we start navigating this whole world of help. And I said, before you go any further, this is another tough lesson. And that's why I asked that first question. I go, these treatment centers are not going to fix your son.
Right.
They're going to give him the roadmap. They're going to give him the blueprint. They're going to give him the resources to help him. But if your son does not want help,
Yeah.
he goes, but that just means I'm helpless. And I go, I know.
Well, sometimes you have to give it up and accept the fact that you are in a position of no control. And I think that, like you just said, I don't know how I would navigate that as a parent. I'd like to think I could make the hard choices, but I'm very attached to my kids, and that would be really hard until you realize that what you're doing is actually holding them back or even harming them. Then you realize the hard thing is the way to love them. Right.
And it goes back to Christian again. That guy's wise beyond his years, but he's pretty old. You're contributing.
You are contributing.
You are contributing. Yeah. And I said, hopefully he'll get to this point where we've had so many people on the podcast before just get sick and tired of being sick and tired and want a different way of life and realize that.
Yesterday, talking to the residents, we brought up, we were doing this kind of overview thing, and we brought up this is a developmental course about child development. Taking over tasks is sort of a research developmental term. And that's when a parent takes over a task that a child could probably struggle and do on their own, a developmental task. They're right on the cusp, but they have to struggle to do it. So an easy example is like tying your shoe. How many times did you watch your kid tie your shoe and you're just like, oh my gosh, this is so painful. Just let me do it.
Yeah.
And then when they do get it done, it's all wonky and it's falling out and stuff. But when you take over that task, you rob them from their growth. And you likely increase their anxiety and insecurity about themselves. They don't feel confident. If you want that kid to be confident, you have to let them struggle with those developmental tasks. And I don't think that changes just because the kid isn't 5 anymore. They might be 25 or 35 or 45.
Like me.
And they still need to struggle with making some of that progress themselves. So if you're a parent with resources and ability and energy and intelligence, and you're jumping in to take over tasks for your adult children, think about what you're doing. You're stopping them from learning and growing because you don't want to watch them struggle.
I learn more and more about this disease every day, but I can tell you a couple of things that I've learned. You can't pray it away.
Right.
You can't buy it away.
No.
And those are the two things that parents seem to be.
Successful parents are kind of like, well, we can do both those.
Yeah.
Right? I'll throw a lot of money at it.
And it doesn't work that way. Yeah. And so you're right. And so the toughest thing.
But it's hard, right? Is it hard to watch your kids struggle?
It's counterintuitive because I'm supposed to teach you. I'm supposed to lead you. I'm supposed to guide you. I'm supposed to support you. I'm supposed to do all these things. How, as a good parent, can I just stand here and watch you fail?
Yep, that's hard. An analogy I use with parents sometimes is the coaching model. Most parents played sports or they had a music teacher or something. And the coaching model is like, you want an expert coach. You don't want a lousy coach. You want an expert coach. And you want that coach to take time with you every day to teach you how to do stuff. But what is the one thing the coach can't do? Go play the game for you. They can't step on the field and do it for you. In fact, that's usually a penalty for the coach.
It is.
Right? But in life, parents, no matter how great you are, no matter how smart you are, successful you are, involved, engaged, and loving you are, you can't step on the field and do it for the kid. It's a penalty. You're robbing them of the opportunity to play the game themselves because guess what? You're not always going to be around, And being around too much might be part of the problem. It's the contribution.
My son's in Little League football, and we had a game this weekend where they lost. And there were some irate parents. I mean, people were upset, screaming and shouting and all
I'm
that
laughing
stuff.
because I've been the irate parent before.
But that was the thing. And I talked to my son. I go, that was a tough loss. He goes, yeah, Dad. I go, they were better.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's how it works.
I'm sorry. And it reminds me of a conversation I had just a couple of days ago. And yeah, everybody likes to win. Winning feels good.
Sure.
And
that's why we practice.
It's amazing. But I have learned more from my losses
Definitely.
than I ever have from winning. I've learned more of what kind of person I am by getting knocked down, beat up, and dragged around. And I said, that's what I tell my son. I go, hey, man.
Well, that's why our high school football coach, Coach Coburn, shout out to Coburn.
Morgan High School football rules.
Yeah. That's why we always played teams way bigger and better than us in preseason. And we would get destroyed because he wanted us to have the learning experience.
I tell my kids now, I go, if you're the best skier in your group, you got to find new friends.
Find a better group.
If you're the best golfer, you got to find new friends.
Yep.
I mean, not really new friends, but just people to do it because that's going to make you better.
You're not going to rise up if you're already at the top.
Yeah. Well, I hope this was an entertaining episode of Project Recovery for you.
Well, I think it's some things to think about. I had fun talking about these things because I think a lot of our listeners are people who are curious about, what is a life of recovery like? Is it possible? And a lot of times they're curious for friends and family. They may not be the person. But, I want this show to be a little broader than just the person who's in active recovery. I want it to include the family. If it is a family disease, the recovery is a family experience as well. And so we all should be taking, in my opinion, and it's hard for me to do too, personal inventory. How am I doing in life? Am I working on my health? Am I progressing? Or have I gotten to a point where I'm stagnant? You and I are midlifers now, buddy.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's the challenge of midlife is self-reflection. And that's when people blow it and they regress and start acting like, they're 18 again. We call that a midlife crisis. But everybody has a crisis in midlife of self-reflection. Do I like who I am? Do I like where I'm going? I think I've said this on the show before. A few years ago, I had this weird realization. I looked around my house and I'm like, I guess I could die here. Like I could live here for the rest of my life. Why not? I mean, and that was kind of this strange where I could see where my path was going. And I'll be honest, I panicked a little bit. I'm like, is this it? Is this the last house I'm going to, and turns out I'm selling my house. I'm living in with my wife. So no, it wasn't the last house, but at the time it could have been. And so personal inventory, self-reflection, regardless of whether you're in midlife or not, is a really healthy thing to do to help keep you on track or get back on track, whether you're an addict or not.
Well, I consider right now just halftime.
Yeah.
And
there you go.
I'm looking forward to a good second half.
Definitely.
I want to say this one real quick. I won't say her name, but she says, I will be 3 years sober on the 17th.
Right on.
Would you guys ever do a class meeting for recovery tips and Q&A? That's kind of what this is. But if you want to, reach out to us on social. If we can ever come to a community and talk about the things that we've learned or help or be a resource to anybody out there, that's what this podcast is all about, is being a resource.
I love Q&As. I would love to take an hour and just answer questions and discuss it. You bet.
I love it. Well, thank you for stopping by and listening to another episode of Project Recovery. And in case you forgot, Project Recovery is what?
It's a KSL podcast.
What position did you play?
I was a kicker.
Sure.